My name is Lena, and my wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. It had been months of planning, dreaming, and carefully picking each detail. Ethan and I had created a day that was going to be perfect in its simplicity. A small ceremony with just the people we cared about. Nothing extravagant, but full of love, full of meaning. It was going to be the beginning of our new chapter together. But when I walked into that garden, the very first thing I saw made my heart drop. The first row, the seats reserved for my parents, was empty. I tried to tell myself it was just a mistake, that maybe they were running late. But as the minutes ticked by and the ceremony started, it became painfully clear. They weren't coming. I didn't want to believe it. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn their approval, hoping that one day they'd see me, really see me for who I was. But instead, I was standing at the altar, looking out at empty seats where my parents should have been. I tried to hold back the tears, but the weight of it all was too much. My heart was breaking, not just because they weren't there, but because I realized I had spent years fighting for their love, for their respect, and it was never going to come. And then my phone buzzed. I knew it was from my dad, but I didn't want to look. But I did. His text simply read, "It's just a trivial event for someone at the bottom." Those words hit me like a slap to the face. I felt the sting deep in my chest. For years, I had given everything for them, my time, my energy, my love. And in return, this was what I got? I wasn't enough. I had never been enough. In that moment, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep waiting for a love that wasn't coming. I couldn't keep fighting for approval that would never come. It was time to stop being the person they wanted me to be. It was time to be the person I needed to be. I've always known where I stood in my family. It was never really a question. Growing up in a suburban neighborhood outside Dallas, Texas, the rules were simple. Success meant wealth, power, and a high social standing. And my parents, Diana and Richard, lived and breathed those rules. They had this unspoken hierarchy that was ingrained in everything they did. And, well, I was never at the top. My older brother Connor was the golden child. From the moment he set foot in high school, it was clear he was destined for great things, at least in the eyes of our parents. Business was his thing, and not just any business. He was going to follow in our dad's footsteps, take over the family's successful empire, and live the kind of life my parents had always dreamed of. He excelled academically, graduated from a prestigious university, and landed a high-paying corporate job before even hitting his 30s. His life was everything they had planned for him and more. Then there was me. I never fit the mold. While Connor was climbing the ladder of business success, I found my passion in a different field, one that wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder or impressing people with flashy titles. I became a nurse, something I've always been proud of, but something my parents could never quite get behind. They saw it as a respectable job, sure, but one that was ultimately beneath my potential. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face when I told him I was pursuing nursing, as if I'd just told him I was going to become a professional juggler. "Nursing?" he had scoffed. "You could be running companies, Lena. You have the brains for that. But instead, you want to change bedpans?" It wasn't just about the job. It was about the disappointment. It was about how, in his eyes, I wasn't living up to the standard he'd set for me. Mom wasn't much different. She didn't say much, but the subtle disapproval was always there. When Connor graduated from college, she threw him a huge party. When I graduated nursing school with honors, they came, barely. They stayed for the ceremony, but then rushed off to some neighborhood barbecue, leaving me to celebrate my achievement without them. They never seemed to understand that, to me, success wasn't just about titles or money. It was about helping others, making a real difference. But that never seemed enough for them. And it wasn't just about our careers. The same pattern followed with everything in our lives. When Connor bought his first house, Mom and Dad helped with a massive down payment, something that would set him up for the future they had always envisioned. When Ethan and I started looking for a place, Mom suggested we live within our means and start with an apartment. The stark contrast was impossible to ignore. For every little milestone in Connor's life, there was a celebration, a grand gesture, an acknowledgement. For me, there was silence, or worse, subtle dismissal. I tried, oh God, I tried to earn their approval. I visited them for family dinners, sent thoughtful gifts on holidays, and called them every week just to check in, but it was never enough. They never saw me for who I was or what I had achieved. They only saw me through the lens of their own narrow expectations, and no matter what I did, I couldn't break through that wall. But still, I held on to hope, the kind of hope that says, maybe one day they'll see me for who I really am. Maybe one day they'll understand. I kept believing that my relationship with them would evolve, that they'd come around. But then, when they called me about their financial troubles, I realized something that would change everything. When I first told my parents I wanted to be a nurse, I thought it was just a career choice. What I didn't expect was the tidal wave of disappointment that hit me from both of them. My dad, a businessman through and through, couldn't hide his disdain. "Nursing?" he said, shaking his head like I had just thrown away a golden opportunity. "You could be running companies, Lena. You could be doing something meaningful, not changing bedpans for a living." It was like a slap to the face. All I had ever wanted was to help people, to make a real difference in the world. But to him, and even to my mom, that wasn't enough. It wasn't about what I could offer the world. It was about the title, the prestige, the social currency. And I wasn't bringing any of that home with my nursing degree. I had never felt like I fit in with their expectations. From a young age, I knew I wasn't going to follow the well-trodden path my family had laid out for me. They envisioned a future where I'd be the next big executive, living in a fancy penthouse, rubbing elbows with the right people. But that wasn't me. I found my purpose in hospitals, in the hum of monitors and the soft, reassuring touch I gave patients who were scared and alone. That's where I felt alive, helping someone feel seen, heard, and cared for. But my parents couldn't understand that. To them, my career wasn't glamorous enough. My dad, especially, couldn't wrap his head around it. "You've got brains, Lena. Why waste them on a job that doesn't make you rich or powerful?" He would say things like that, almost as if he thought nursing was some sort of consolation prize. I tried to explain it to them, but it always felt like I was talking to a brick wall. The more I tried, the more their disappointment became obvious. My mom wasn't as vocal about it, but the way she looked at me when I made those career decisions spoke volumes. "It's respectable," she would say, but her voice was flat. There was no excitement, no pride in it. To her, it was just the bare minimum. When Connor graduated from college, they threw him a huge party. It was lavish. He got a brand new car, gifts, applause. When I graduated nursing school with honors, they came to the ceremony, but they left almost as soon as it ended. They had a barbecue to attend, after all. So much for celebrating my achievements. I don't think I'll ever forget how hollow it felt, standing there by myself, looking around for any sign that they cared. But they never did, not in the way I needed them to. When Connor bought his first house, my parents chipped in with a generous down payment. For Ethan and me, it was a different story. We were told to live within our means. "Start small," my mom suggested, "maybe an apartment for now." The disparity in their treatment of us was glaring, but I couldn't bring myself to call them out on it. I kept hoping, desperately hoping, that one day they'd see that I was doing something meaningful, that I was worthy of their praise. Not for the money I made or the title I carried, but for the impact I had on people's lives. And then came the phone call. My parents were facing foreclosure. They needed $50,000 to stay afloat. At first, I hesitated. I had been saving for years to buy a house, to build a future with Ethan. But when they called, they said they had already asked Connor for help, and with his expenses, his fancy lifestyle, they couldn't count on him. They needed me. I agreed, of course. I loved them, and no matter how many times they made me feel less than, I still felt like it was my duty as their daughter to help them. But even as I transferred the money, something felt wrong. They had no gratitude, no thank you, just an assumption that I would always be there for them. Months went by, and the payments came in, $600 a month, like clockwork. But as time passed, it became clear. They didn't see me as an equal. They saw me as someone they could rely on when they needed help, a tool, not a person. I started to wonder, when would it ever be enough? When would they finally see that I didn't need their approval to feel validated? When would they realize that my career, my choices, and my life were more than enough? But no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, I felt like I was always fighting a losing battle. I was giving them everything I had, my time, my money, my love, and yet it was still never enough. I wasn't the person they expected me to be, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't change their perception of me. That thought, the realization that no amount of success or sacrifice would ever change how they saw me, stayed with me every day. It hurt more than anything I had ever experienced. But what hurt even more was the truth I finally had to face. If they couldn't see me for who I was, if they couldn't appreciate me for the person I had become, then maybe I needed to stop trying to fit into their narrow vision of success. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start seeing myself through my own eyes. It should have been the happiest day of my life. I had spent months planning every detail, pouring my heart into making this wedding exactly what Ethan and I wanted: intimate, meaningful, and a celebration of our love. We didn't need a grand, over-the-top wedding. A simple ceremony in a beautiful garden with the people who mattered most. That's all we needed. Or so I thought. I stood in front of the mirror, fixing my veil, trying to calm my nerves. The moment was finally here. I was marrying Ethan, the man I loved, the man who had never once made me feel less than. As I walked down the aisle, I smiled, looking around at our small group of guests. The sun was shining, the music playing softly. It was everything I had hoped for. Everything except one thing. The first row, where my parents should have been sitting, was empty. I froze for a moment. I tried to push the thought away. Maybe they were running late. Maybe something had come up. But as the ceremony continued, the empty seats remained exactly where they were. No one was coming. My parents weren't there. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had to keep going. This was my day, my moment, and I couldn't let their absence ruin it. But the weight of it hit me harder with every passing second. And then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my dad. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what it said, but my hands shook as I pulled it out. The message was short, to the point, and it made my stomach drop. It's just a trivial event for someone at the bottom. I stared at the screen. I couldn't believe it. The words felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just that they had skipped my wedding. It was the fact that my father had dismissed it completely. To him, my wedding, the moment I had dreamed of my whole life, was nothing more than a trivial event. It didn't matter because I wasn't living the life they envisioned for me. I wasn't at the top, I wasn't living in the world of high society, and my career didn't measure up to the success of my brother. The anger and hurt flooded me all at once, but there was no time to process it. I had to keep going. I had to make it through the ceremony. As I walked down the aisle toward Ethan, I felt every step way heavier than the last. And yet, when I finally reached him, standing there with that look of pure love and support in his eyes, I felt something shift. And that moment, I knew I was making the right choice. This wasn't about my family's approval. This was about us. As the ceremony went on, I tried to focus on the love we shared, the vows we were about to exchange. But my mind kept drifting back to the empty seats, to the message from my dad. The pain of their rejection settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. After the ceremony, I found myself surrounded by friends, by people who genuinely cared, but the emptiness remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how much I tried, no matter how much love I gave, it would never be enough for my parents. They had shown me in the cruelest way possible that I would never be able to meet their expectations. That night, as Ethan and I sat together, he held me close, trying to comfort me, but the pain was deep. He kept telling me that their rejection wasn't a reflection of me, but it felt impossible to believe. They were my parents. They were supposed to love me unconditionally. And yet, they had chosen to skip my wedding, to leave me standing at the altar with an empty seat in the front row. The worst part wasn't just the absence. It was the cold, calculated message from my dad. It wasn't just a missed event. It was a statement. I wasn't worthy of their time, of their love, because I didn't fit their mold. I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder like Connor. I wasn't playing the game they wanted me to play. And that's when I realized something I had been denying for so long. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would always be at the bottom in their eyes. This wasn't about me or the love Ethan and I shared. This was about their own expectations, their own need to control everything around them. I had spent my entire life chasing their approval, hoping that one day they would see me for who I really was. But on that day, as I stood there, realizing they weren't coming, I understood. Their approval wasn't something I would ever get, and it was time to stop trying. That night, Ethan and I talked about our future, and I made a decision. I would stop letting their rejection define me. I would stop giving them the power to make me feel small. This was my life, my wedding, and I was going to choose happiness, whether or not they were part of it. It all started with a phone call that I never expected. My parents had always been careful about money, tight-lipped about their finances, always pretending like everything was under control. But when they reached out to me, everything changed. It wasn't a casual call to check in or talk about life. No, this was different. My father's voice crackled with tension, something I'd never heard before. "Lena, we need your help. We're in trouble." The words were blunt, but they hit me like a gut punch. My mind immediately raced. What was going on? Were they sick? Was something seriously wrong? When I asked what was happening, my father's answer was startling. "We've been having some financial issues. The business is in a bind, and we're facing foreclosure. We need $50,000 to cover the bills, or we're done." I was stunned into silence. My parents, these proud, self-sufficient people, had never once let me in on their struggles. They had always made it seem like they were untouchable, living in this perfect bubble where everything always worked out. But now they were asking me for help, and not just any help. They needed a large sum of money to keep their lives from crumbling, and they were asking me, their daughter, to bail them out? I thought about it for a moment, my heart racing. I wasn't rich. Ethan and I had been saving for years to buy a house of our own, a modest home that would fit the future we wanted. But this was my family. How could I say no? I had always been there for them, even when they made me feel like I didn't measure up. And now they were in a crisis. So, after talking with Ethan, I made the decision to help. We didn't have the full $50,000 saved, but we had a portion, and we would figure out the rest. It felt like the right thing to do. I transferred the money to their account, and it was like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. "We'll pay you back, Lena. You know we will," my mother promised. For a while, everything seemed fine. The money was sent. The payments started to come in. They sent me $600 each month, like clockwork. It wasn't much, but I thought it was a good sign. Maybe things were looking up for them. Maybe, just maybe, this act of kindness would bring us closer. But as time went on, I started to notice something that didn't sit right with me. The monthly payments were made on time, yes, but there was something off. My parents never really talked about how things were going. There was no acknowledgement, no gratitude, just the same old distance. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. They had never treated me as an equal in their lives, always acting like I was a second choice. And then it hit me. The payments, the financial help, they were just a way for them to keep me in line. They weren't actually planning to repay me the way they said they would. No, this was part of their strategy to keep me locked into their expectations. They had always seen me as their safety net, their backup plan whenever things went south. And even though I had helped them, even though I had given them a large portion of what they needed, it never felt like they truly saw me as an equal. I was just another resource, another way for them to avoid facing their own failures. What really stung, though, was that I couldn't escape the feeling that they had manipulated me into this. They had used their financial crisis to guilt me into helping them. My father's voice on the phone, calm but urgent, had been a calculated move to make me feel responsible. They had turned to me, not because they had no other options, but because they knew I would never say no. They knew how much I wanted their approval, and they used that against me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I had sacrificed so much for them. I had been the dutiful daughter, constantly seeking their validation. And yet, in return, all I got was distance, manipulation, and the knowledge that I had been part of a system that wasn't built on love. It was built on expectation. It wasn't until a few months later when I noticed something strange. They stopped paying. The $600 payments stopped coming. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just an oversight. But then another month passed, and still nothing. I tried calling, but my father avoided the topic, changing the subject every time. The silence became unbearable. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I couldn't let them continue treating me like this, like I was a bank, a resource, someone they could rely on when it was convenient. I sent them a polite but firm email, reminding them of the agreement we had made. "I've noticed that the payments haven't been made. Please let me know when I can expect them." And that's when it hit me. The manipulation wasn't just about money. It was about control. My parents had never cared about repaying me. They had only cared about keeping me hooked, making sure I stayed tied to them, to their needs, to their expectations. When they stopped paying, I realized that their apology had never been sincere. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about maintaining their hold on me. That was when I knew. I had to stop letting them dictate my life. I had to stop being the one they always turn to. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. The loan wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my self-respect. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me any longer. The silence between my parents and me grew unbearable. At first, I told myself that they were just going through a tough time, that the financial strain was simply making everything harder. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The calls stopped, the messages stopped. The monthly payments I had counted on slowly faded away, and I found myself waiting for an apology, waiting for some acknowledgement that this was not how family was supposed to work. But nothing came. It was like we were in two different worlds. They had their perfect life, their vacation homes, their luxury cars, and now it seemed they didn't even have the decency to uphold a simple agreement with their daughter. What hurt the most was the realization that I wasn't part of their world. I was just a fallback, a safety net they only reached for when their perfect life started to crumble. And when the dust settled, they pushed me right back into the shadows. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I sent an email, as calmly as I could, asking for the overdue payments to be made. I didn't know what I expected, but I thought they might finally take responsibility. I was wrong. Instead of the simple apology or an explanation I was hoping for, I got an email back from my dad, and it was worse than I could have imagined. It was cold, dismissive, and made me feel like I was the one in the wrong. He accused me of being impatient, of not understanding the big picture. "This is family, Lena. We're all in this together. You're making a big deal out of nothing," he wrote. The nerve, the audacity. I couldn't believe it. It was like everything I had done for them, everything I had sacrificed, meant nothing. But the email wasn't even the worst part. No, that came when I called my mom. I needed some sort of explanation, something to make sense of the emotional toll this was taking on me. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. "Why are you avoiding me? Why are you not paying back the money you owe?" And that's when it happened, the moment that truly broke me. My mom, the one person I always thought I could turn to, told me something that shook me to my core. "You're being unreasonable, Lena. You've always been so dramatic about money. Family helps family. That's what matters. Can't you see that Thomas needs us right now? He's struggling. His business is falling apart. He's under a lot of pressure. We have to support him." My heart dropped. I was stunned into silence. The realization hit me like a wave. My mom wasn't just asking me to forgive the debt. She was asking me to turn my back on everything, on myself, on my needs, on my boundaries, all to keep enabling my brother's privileged life. She expected me to keep giving, to keep sacrificing, while they lived their lives like nothing had happened. Thomas was getting the support, getting the sympathy, while I was left to pick up the pieces of my own shattered expectations. The words she said next were like a punch in the gut. "You've always been so selfish, Lena. You've never understood the importance of family. It's not just about money. It's about supporting each other when things get tough." I wanted to scream. How could she say that? How could she call me selfish after everything I'd done for them? All these years, I had been the one to carry the weight. I had been the one to sacrifice, to give, to try to keep the family together. And now, I was being accused of being selfish? It wasn't just hurtful, it was cruel. I hung up, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The deeper betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about how little they cared about my feelings, my well-being, my boundaries. They had turned everything on me, twisting the narrative to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. I tried to make sense of it, tried to find some way to forgive them. But the truth was, I was done. The years of being manipulated, the constant feeling of not being enough, it was too much. I had spent my whole life chasing their approval, thinking if I just did more, gave more, maybe one day they would see me. But they never would. They had shown me time and time again that I would never be enough for them. So I made a decision, a hard one. I wasn't going to chase after their love anymore. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into feeling like I wasn't worthy. No more excuses, no more trying to please them. I had done enough. It was time to stand up for myself, even if it meant cutting them off. Even if it meant facing the painful truth that they would never change. And as I sat there, heartbroken but resolute, I knew that the hardest part was over. I wasn't going to be their fallback anymore. I was done being the one who always got pushed aside. It was time to let go. It had been weeks since that dinner, and each day felt like I was carrying the weight of a decision I wasn't sure I was ready to make. I could still hear my father's cold words echoing in my mind. "You don't understand, Lena. This is how family works." It was like the last straw. The moment I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, I was never going to meet their expectations. They would never see me the way I saw myself. But somehow, I still kept hoping. Maybe if I proved them wrong, they'd finally see my worth. But with every passing day, I realized that wasn't going to happen. The pain of being dismissed, ignored, manipulated, it all started to weigh heavier than the hope I had left. Ethan could see it too. He had been my rock through everything, his love and support unwavering, but even he knew something had to change. One night, as we sat together after a quiet dinner, I looked at him, my heart pounding, and said, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep fighting for something I'll never get. Ethan didn't immediately respond. He just sat with me, holding my hand, and I could feel his understanding without him saying a word. But inside, I was breaking. The family I had spent my entire life trying to please, the family I had hoped would one day come to understand me, was a lie. They would never change. They would never accept me, not for who I truly was. The truth was slowly sinking in, and I didn't like what it was telling me. I wasn't just fighting for their approval. I was fighting for a version of myself that didn't exist anymore. And as much as it hurt, as much as it shattered every dream I'd held onto for so long, I realized I had to walk away from it all. For years, I had allowed them to define me. I let their opinions of my career, my relationship, my choices dictate how I saw myself. I had convinced myself that I was doing everything right, that if I just kept giving, kept sacrificing, they would finally see my worth. But they hadn't. They never would. And that wasn't my fault. Ethan, I whispered, my voice trembling, I've given them everything, and it's never enough. I'm not just their daughter. I'm their backup plan, a tool to be used when it's convenient. Ethan squeezed my hand tighter. You're not their backup. You're not anyone's backup. You're worth more than they've ever shown you, and it's time you started showing that to yourself. I wanted to believe him, but could I? Could I really walk away from the dream I'd held for so long? The dream of having a family that loved me for who I was, not what I could do for them? Could I finally accept that their approval would never come and that I needed to stop fighting for something that wasn't mine to have? That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. I thought about everything I had been through, the long nights of trying to earn my father's respect, the feeling of constantly being overlooked, and the deep loneliness that came from loving a family who couldn't love me back in the way I needed. I thought about the way they always chose Connor, always put him first, no matter what I did. How they never celebrated my achievements the way they did his. How they treated me like I was less than simply because I didn't follow their script. The hardest part wasn't just facing the reality of it all. It was facing the fact that I had allowed it to go on for so long. I had let them dictate my life, my choices, my self-worth, and it was time to stop. The next morning, as the sun streamed through the window, I made the decision. I would call them. I would stand up for myself, even if it meant they would never speak to me again. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about choosing myself over the endless cycle of trying to earn their love. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and called my father. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I waited for him to pick up. Lena, he answered, his voice cold, as if nothing had changed. Dad, I said, the words coming out with more strength than I expected. I'm done. I'm done fighting for your approval. I'm done pretending that I'm okay with the way you treat me. I've spent my entire life trying to make you proud, but nothing I do is ever enough. I'm not your backup anymore. I'm done being treated like I don't matter. There was a long pause. I could hear my father's breath on the other end, as if he was trying to process what I had just said. But I wasn't going to wait for him to apologize. I wasn't going to beg for anything anymore. I'm sorry you feel that way, Lena, he finally said, his tone defensive. But this is family. You don't just walk away from family. No, Dad, I replied, my voice steady. This isn't family. This is manipulation. You've been using me, expecting me to just give and give without ever considering how much it hurts. And I'm not going to let you do that to me anymore. And just like that, something inside me snapped. I was no longer the daughter who tried to please her parents. I was no longer the one who bent over backward for their approval. I was someone new, someone who knew her worth. and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me again. I hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness, but mostly I felt free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's expectations. I was free to live for myself. And as I turned to Ethan, who had been silently supporting me through the whole thing, I knew that this was the first step in taking back my life. This was the moment I had chosen to put myself first. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own future. The air in the restaurant was thick with tension. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I walked in, my hand firmly holding Ethan's. We had agreed to meet my parents, along with Connor and his wife Grace, at a neutral spot, somewhere away from the chaos of our home. But no matter how many times I rehearsed what I was going to say, no matter how many times I told myself I was ready for this moment, nothing could prepare me for how it would actually feel. As soon as we walked in, my parents looked up from the table. They were sitting across from Connor and Grace, and it was obvious they had been discussing something, probably preparing their defense. My father's eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of something. Was it guilt, or was it just his usual defensive posture? Either way, I didn't care anymore. The time for polite conversations and dancing around the truth was over. "Lena," my father greeted me, his voice tight, "glad you could make it." But it wasn't genuine, not even close. Grace didn't even bother to smile. She simply nodded at me, looking at me like I was a problem that needed to be solved, not a daughter who deserved respect. Connor sat quietly, as if trying to stay out of the line of fire, but I could see the tension in his face, the guilt that was slowly creeping in. I wasn't sure if he felt bad for what had happened, or if he was just realizing the mess we were all in. Either way, it didn't matter. This was about me now. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and sat down across from them, Ethan beside me, his hand never leaving mine. I could feel his quiet strength, and for the first time in a long time, I felt sure of myself. The calm before the storm was over. I wasn't the same person I was when I had walked into this family, and I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. "I'm glad we could finally sit down and talk," I said, my voice steady, "because this has gone on long enough." My dad opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "No, let me finish," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. This was my time to speak my truth. For years, I've let you and Mom treat me like I'm less than. I've watched you dote on Connor, throw him parties, help him buy houses, and celebrate every little achievement. Meanwhile, when I graduated nursing school, you barely even showed up. You didn't celebrate me. You didn't care." My dad's face flushed. He opened his mouth again, but I pressed on. "I've given everything for this family. Everything. And for what? So you can throw me away whenever it's convenient for you?" I paused, looking around the table. "You're not even asking for help now. You're expecting it. You think I'll just bail you out again, no questions asked? Well, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm done." I could feel the weight of my words in the room, like everything had shifted. Ethan squeezed my hand, giving me the strength I needed to keep going. "You've been treating me like a backup plan, like I'm some sort of safety net you can just pull from when things go wrong," I said, my voice rising. "You used me. You guilted me into giving you money. You made me feel like I owed you something for being your daughter. But I'm not a bank, and I'm not your personal ATM, and I'm not going to stand by and let you keep doing this to me." There was a long pause. The tension in the air was suffocating. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his carefully constructed armor. He didn't say anything right away, but I could see the gears turning in his head, the realization that things had changed, that I wasn't the same daughter I had once been. Finally, Connor spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "Dad, she's right. This isn't okay." He looked at me, a hint of apology in his eyes. "I didn't know about the loan. I didn't know that you were paying for things while Mom and Dad were, well, doing what they did." He glanced at my parents, his expression darkening. "You shouldn't have been put in this position." My father stiffened at the accusation, his face turning red. "Connor, this isn't the time." "No," Connor interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "It is the time, Dad. You've been treating Lena like she's invisible, like she's not good enough, and now we're all paying the price for it." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt like everything was shifting. My parents, the people who had always had the power to make me feel small, were now being called out. I wasn't the only one in this family who had been hurt by their actions. Connor was seeing it too, and that realization was almost too much to process. I turned to my father, my voice soft but steady. "You've never seen me for who I really am, but I see myself now, and I'm done letting you treat me like this." My dad's face tightened, and for a moment I thought he might say something to defend himself, but instead he just sat there, his expression unreadable. And in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to see me or love me the way I had always hoped. I had already let go of that dream. The silence in the room was deafening as my father finally spoke. "We'll pay you back, Lena." His voice was cold, almost dismissive. "But you need to understand, this is family. You don't walk away from family." I stood up, feeling the power of my own words, the power of my own strength. "No, Dad," I said. "It's not about money anymore. It's about respect, and I'm done being disrespected." With that, I walked out of the restaurant, Ethan following close behind. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from something that had always held me captive, the need for my family's approval. And as I stepped outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. The weeks that followed felt like a fog lifting from my mind. For so long, I had been caught in this whirlwind of trying to win my family's approval, constantly striving to meet their expectations, no matter how much it cost me. But now, something inside me had shifted. There was a quiet strength that I had been holding on to all along, and for the first time, I was letting it out. I spent the next few days reflecting on everything that had happened, on the pain, the anger, the heartbreak, and I realized something that I had known deep down but hadn't fully accepted until now. I had spent my entire life living for everyone else, trying to please my parents, trying to earn their love, all while neglecting the one person who mattered most, me. But now, I was choosing to live for myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to live. I wasn't going to be shackled by the weight of other people's opinions, and I wasn't going to chase after love that came with conditions. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's validation. It was my own, and it had always been. Ethan and I spent more time together, just the two of us. I found myself smiling more, feeling more connected to him than I had before. We talked about our future, about the life we wanted to build. There was no longer this cloud of uncertainty hanging over us, no longer the constant fear of my parents' judgment or their disapproval. We were free to dream, to plan, to be. It wasn't an easy road, though. There were still moments when I thought about my family, about what could have been if things had been different. But as time went on, those moments became less frequent. I realized that the dream of a perfect family, the dream of finally earning their love, was just that, a dream. It wasn't real. And the real freedom came when I let go of that dream. The breakthrough came when I stood in front of the mirror one morning and realized something that had been staring me in the face all along. I was enough. I had always been enough. I didn't need to keep fighting for their love or approval. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I had built my own life, my own success, and I had earned every bit of it. The work I had done as a nurse, the relationships I had built, and the love I had found with Ethan, they were enough. I was enough. And that was a truth I had struggled to believe for so long. But now, it was clear. It was crystal clear. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the park with Ethan, I received a message from Connor. I had avoided communication with him for a while, not knowing how to face him after everything that had happened, but his message stopped me in my tracks. Lena, I'm sorry for everything. I've seen things differently now. I should have been there for you, and I wasn't. I'll always have your back. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. I had spent so many years waiting for this moment, for him to finally understand, but now it didn't matter as much as I thought it would. I had already healed. I had already moved on. I decided to text him back. I appreciate you reaching out, Connor, but I've already moved forward. I've found peace, and I'm focused on the life I'm building now. It felt liberating. In that moment, I realized I didn't need an apology to validate my decision. I didn't need anyone's approval to know that I had made the right choice. I had already found my peace, my strength, and my happiness. From that moment on, I focused on my future. I poured my energy into the career that I loved, the one that brought me fulfillment, and into the life I was building with Ethan. We started looking at houses together, planning our future without the weight of past disappointments holding us back. For the first time, I was building a life on my own terms, and it felt good. It felt right. The road to getting here wasn't easy, and there were still moments when I felt the sting of past wounds. But those moments didn't define me anymore. I had taken control of my life, and I was no longer allowing anyone else to define my worth. If you're listening to this and you're still stuck in a cycle of seeking approval or fighting for love from people who don't see you for who you are, let me tell you this. You don't need to keep fighting. You don't need to keep proving yourself. You are enough, just as you are. Take a moment, breathe, and choose yourself. Build the life you deserve, and know that the only approval you need is your own. If this story spoke to you, if you've been fighting for something that wasn't meant for you, I encourage you to take that step. Let go of the past, choose yourself, and embrace the life you were always meant to live. Don't forget to share your thoughts with me in the comments. How have you taken back your power? How have you chosen yourself? And if you found this story inspiring, hit that like button and subscribe for more empowering content. You've got this. You always have. It took me a long time to realize that the real change in my life wasn't going to come from waiting for others to see me. It wasn't going to come from fighting for approval, chasing after something that wasn't truly mine to have. The moment I let go of that expectation was the moment I began to build the life I had always deserved. It was hard, so much harder than I thought it would be. For years, I had been so wrapped up in the idea of a perfect family, of earning their love, of somehow being enough in their eyes. But the truth is, that love wasn't going to come. And once I accepted that, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just about walking away from my parents, from the idea of what family was supposed to look like. It was about finally choosing myself. There were moments when I wanted to call them, when the old patterns of reaching out for approval kicked in, but each time I stopped myself. The thought that had always eluded me was becoming clearer. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their approval to know that I was enough. Ethan and I began to dream more freely, more confidently. We started talking about the life we wanted to build together without worrying about what my family thought, without holding back because we were afraid of what they might say. The weight that had been dragging me down for so long, the constant pressure to meet their standards, was finally lifting. And then, one day, out of nowhere, I got a message from Connor. For a moment, I froze. After everything that had happened, I didn't know what to expect. But when I opened the message, I found that it was simple, honest, and, for the first time in a long time, heartfelt. Lena, I'm sorry. I see things differently now. I should have been there for you. I'll always have your back.
I didn't know how to respond at first. For so long, I had been waiting for him to say something like this, hoping that one day my family would understand how deeply they had hurt me. But as I read his message, I realized something important. His apology, though appreciated, wasn't going to fix what had been broken. It wasn't going to change everything that had led me to this point. I didn't need his apology to feel validated. I had already found my peace.
I took a deep breath and replied with something simple but honest. Thank you for reaching out, Connor, but I've already moved forward. I'm focusing on building the life I want, and I'm in a good place now. It felt liberating to say that. It wasn't about closing the door on my family. It was about choosing to open a new door for myself, a door that led to a life filled with self-respect, true love, and peace. Looking back, I see how much I've grown. The hardest part wasn't standing up to my parents or cutting ties. It was learning to stand up for myself, to believe that I was worthy of love and respect, regardless of whether I got it from them. I didn't need their approval to be proud of the person I had become. I had already built a life that was mine, one that was fulfilling and true to who I was. So here's the ultimate choice I want to leave you with. You don't need to keep fighting for love from people who can't give it to you the way you deserve. You don't need to keep proving your worth to anyone. You are enough, just as you are. You are worthy of love, of respect, of happiness, without conditions, without exceptions. If you're still trying to earn someone's approval, I encourage you to stop. Stop fighting for something that isn't yours. Take a moment to reflect on your life, your dreams, and your worth. Choose yourself. Choose to let go of the toxic expectations that are holding you back. If this story spoke to you, if you're in a place where you need to choose yourself, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've taken back your power. If you found this story inspiring, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's continue this journey of empowerment together. You've got this. Always have, always will.